Thank you for auditing the always positive new music review show hosted by a French professor who every once in a while likes to remind you that France is the #2 country in the world for producing and consuming hip-hop. And it has been for decades. Now listen, much like with American rap, I paid a lot of attention to French hip-hop during its golden age, and then around the turn of the century, I stopped paying attention for like 20 years. So there's a big lack in my knowledge of what's been happening in hip-hop. I've been trying to keep up, I've been trying to pay attention, but it's not always easy. It's hard for me, actually, to stay in touch with France. The internet makes it easier, but the college where I teach, which I do not represent on this channel, but the college where I teach canceled the French major. So I don't get to teach very much French civilization, I don't have any French friends here in Western New York. And so I'm kind of put in a place here where I don't have that much contact with French culture. So I try to keep up with French music. I try to keep up with French hip-hop. I pay attention to a lot of French soccer. But that's about it. Et si vous êtes français, si vous regardez ce vidéo, s'il vous plaît, partagez ce vidéo avec vos amis parce que quand je fais des vidéos sur le rap français, je reçois très peu de vues. Alors, s'il vous plaît, aidez-moi. Comme ça, je peux faire plus de vidéos sur le rap français ou francophone. So it's hard, like my homepage. So every time I open up my internet, it goes to hiphopcorner.fr. So I can maybe see the most recent news, maybe hear about an album. I've tried to train my algorithm. Okay, so the algorithm, I use Tidal. Every time I like a French rap album, I download it, I heart it, but still, I don't see the hip-hop that comes up. So this is my review of 2022. I've been trying to figure it out, because what happens is I'll sometimes go to the charts of French hip-hop, what are the top songs, and it's not that it's bad, it's just that it's not usually to my taste. So there's a huge prevalence of auto-tuned melodic rap in French hip-hop, much like there is in America, but it's way more pronounced, as far as I can tell, in the mainstream of French hip-hop. And it gets to be a little, hard to approach. There's a lot of artists with 3-letter names. I call it airport rap, because airports have a 3-letter code. Everyone has these names, and then they all kind of, it's hard for me to approach. So what I did, I was like, how am I going to do it? I need to talk about at least one French rap album a year, hopefully more. So I went to Reddit. I went to Reddit /rap français, and I asked them, what is the album? If I had to pick one album, what should I review? Now, those wonderful people over at Reddit /rap français, I think is what it's called, they gave me 20 suggestions. And at the end of this video, I am going to tell you what I thought about everything else that I listened to, because I got a lot of very good suggestions. French rap is doing very well, and it is not all, okay? It's not. But eventually what I settled on was the album Moussa by Prince Waly. Prince Waly. Why? Why did I pick this album? For many reasons. One, it sort of has a nice middle ground between a lot of different currents in French rap. So it's kind of personal and philosophical, it's kind of street and grimy, it's kind of pop and singy. It calls back to the golden age of French hip-hop, which is basically the middle of the 90s to the early 2000s, but it also feels quite modern. And really, the main reason is that this is the best cover of any rap album in 2022. This cover, I think, is absolutely astounding. Look at this cover. Tell me in the comments, am I wrong? Tell me a cover that's better than this in American hip-hop. The only cover that even comes close is the Kendrick Lamar cover. But look at this. He's face first into an airbag in a Saab. Now, it happens to be that this Saab is the same Saab that was on his album cover from before. I didn't know that when I saw this. I just saw this image and I thought, luxury and failure all at once. The parental advisory sticker, which is just there for affect. You don't need that in France. They don't have the PMRC in France. But it's sort of signal its connection to American hip-hop. And the funny thing was, what I ended up learning and I didn't know, is that it's very meaningful. So I listened to this rapper's album all the way through, like twice, and then I started doing research. And I learned that he had cancer in 2019. 27 years old. Guy gets diagnosed with cancer. Chemotherapy, whole thing. And this album is his return. So the idea behind this album cover is that was his, life, and then he got into this crash, and there he is face first into the airbag. So it's kind of neat because in general, if you know anything about my channel, I try to stay away from biography whenever possible. I try to just study art as it is. But sometimes the biography is so important that you have to include it. I with most French rap, there's a sort of similar story behind a lot of the artists, and that story I think is very important. Most of it is made by people from the suburbs of a major French city, usually Paris, as it is in this case. He's from Montreuil in the 93, the Saint-Denis region. And, he is the children of first, second generation immigrants from Senegal. And this is very much the story of French hip-hop. It's part of the reason why French hip-hop is so great and so interesting, is that it reflects the reality of French civilization, which is that it's a very cosmopolitan society. It is a society that is greatly enriched by its immigrant population. And despite the rise of far-right nationalism, we see constantly the ways in which the country is enriched, the culture is enriched by these different forces. So basically always the story of French rap is inherently interesting in that context. But this cancer element is quite interesting. It happens to be that my closest friend, who is French, also had a cancer diagnosis around the same time, also recovering. So if I keep talking about it, I cry because it's such a good friend of mine. So, it's a very interesting position to be in. And then I watched his performance, Prince Waly's performance on Colors. If you don't know Colors, it's like a international YouTube channel that spotlights a lot of great music. And there's two things. I saw his performance. His performance was great, very heartfelt and interesting. And then I saw an interview. And in that interview, he just came across as so spectacularly down to earth, kind, genuine, thoughtful. I don't know, just like there's something about the way that he presented himself. It's like a lot of French rappers seem more like rappers than like a sort of traditional sort of French public figure. French public figures in general tend to be very sort of philosophical, existential, contemplative, intellectual, whereas, rappers tend to be more extroverted and flashy and flamboyant and all that. He managed to sort of be both of those things at the same time. If you are on my Instagram account, you'll know that that I really enjoy. He talks about how much he likes Mobb Deep. One of my favorite things about living in France is talking to French people about French hip-hop. About American hip-hop. Because, they just pronounce it the way they pronounce it. Mobb Deep. And that's funny. Sadly, the best pronunciation I ever heard was for the now disgraced singer R. Kelly. I had no idea what the person was saying when they told me, I love R. Kelly. So he's there and he's talking about how much he loves Mobb Deep. And, Mobb Deep is a huge influence on the golden era of French hip-hop. The reason that I studied French, the reason that I lived in the city of Marseille for a year, and I support l'Olympique de Marseille, is because of the album L'École du Micro d'Argent by I Am, which was heavily influenced by Mobb Deep. So a lot of the golden era of French hip-hop comes from the love of the Wu-Tang Clan and the love of Mobb Deep. Even in the way that he dresses, you can see he's wearing an Averex leather jacket, and that's just Averex. Whenever you see Averex, you just think Queens, you think Mobb Deep, you think Nas, and he's very much trying to be in that mode. But as always, it's tricky because if an album is like just strictly looking backwards, and just so you know, the thumping is going to stop soon. I have a baby, and she's upstairs, and whenever she's like on her changing table, she just slams her feet on the table the whole time. So that was the bumping that you heard. It's going to stop now. I don't edit my videos, by the way, if you didn't know that. So you're welcome. You got to hear some thumps. Whenever there's an album that does too much looking backwards, I get a little skeptical, because I have to think about, like, what's the audience? Is this just an audience for old people who miss the way things were in the past? Like, hip hop is a living art, and it cannot be made exclusively looking backwards. I don't think it can be made exclusively looking backwards. So that's why this album in particular, Prince Waly, Moussa, is so interesting, because it's a real album, but it flows between different modes. In that interview on Colors, he talks about how he goes from the third person to the first person. So the third person, il, elle, on, he's talking, about stories sort of removed. And he sort of correctly says that a lot of hip-hop, even when they use the word I, they're describing stories about other people, other experiences. And how this album, he's moving towards the je, towards the I, the first person. And so that's a very interesting transition to exist within one album. So there's at least 3 phases that I can find in this album. There's the tough guy, there's the lover man, and then there's the honest man. L'honnête homme. I don't know how else to say it. It's a French expression. It doesn't translate perfectly. Someone who's like trying to be noble and trying to get better. And this is what I love so much about all hip-hop, is the range of expression that it allows. The older that the art form gets, the more range of expression rap artists are giving to themselves. They are allowing themselves to be vulnerable. They are allowing themselves to talk about trauma, to talk about personal growth, to talk about generational misery. Like, they're allowing themselves to do these things more and more. And it's just getting richer and richer. The art is getting richer and richer. I miss the old days of French hip-hop when NTM and IM are all... Yeah, that's fine. But hip-hop has evolved. Side note. Because the French golden era was so good, rap in Quebec followed French hip-hop, not American hip-hop. So that's why hip-hop from Quebec is so much better than hip-hop from English-speaking Canada. It's cool, right? Anyways. So he's talking a lot about Mobb Deep, which is great. I love Mobb Deep. But in reality, the real touchstone for this album is a different group, is a French group called Lunatique. Normally at this point I would show you a CD, but I keep all my French hip-hop CDs in my office. Lunatique is a very important band or group in the history of French hip-hop. And it's important to me because it was the first time that I listened to a French hip-hop album that I bought. I bought it at the Fnac, I believe on Rue Belzance in Marseille. I was like, I'm not feeling it. Like, I just didn't like it. I thought it was okay, but like, it didn't grab me. This was 2000, right around the time when I was going to be shutting off my mind to new music. And so I bought the album, I listened to it a couple times, and that was it. What was interesting is, in a way, the end of the golden era of French hip-hop began with that album Lunatique. Because it featured Ali and Booba, who'd become the biggest name in French hip-hop. He is still the biggest name in French hip-hop, I think. I mean, there's other, newer people who are, hotter on the streets, but Booba is sort of this institution who can just change everything. He's a huge, huge force in French hip-hop. I just pissed off all the French viewers. Mais Booba n'est pas le numéro un. I know. But he's a very, very big deal. But what he did was... So most art that is adopted from other cultures starts inauthentically and then becomes authentic. Okay, so French rock and roll started off as a pale imitation of American rock and roll, just doing weird little covers, pretending like they were Americans, and then eventually over time, the expression became authentic. French hip-hop went the other way around. It started off completely authentic, just talking about the struggles of growing up in the banlieue or the suburbs, the outskirts of a society. In France, they put the poor on the outsides of the city as opposed to the middle, because the middle has already been established. That's what it was about. But with Lunatique, and especially with Booba's solo albums, all of a sudden it was about dealing coke and having so many guns. And there's just not that many guns in France. You know that whole thing about America is like a totally stupid country because we have too many guns? Yeah, that's not true in France. So, I'm sure there are people who have guns, but the whole thing was just like this weird imitation, and just, we still see it all the time. Like, the top of the charts often in French hip hop is just, people pretending like they're living in The Wire. People pretending like they're Freeway Rick Ross, when it's just a very different situation. So, it's very useful to me to listen to a rapper who is this inspired by Lunatique, by Ali and Booba, the two rappers from Lunatique, inspired by them in the same way that he was inspired by Mobb Deep. And it's like, it allows me to sort of forgive Lunatique. It allows me to just sort of say, oh yeah, but of course it wasn't all bad. Booba's an amazing rapper. Ali, seriously, his verse on this album is insane. It's so good. So I think I was probably wrong. Lunatique is probably great. I'm going to go back to my office and I'm going to take the Lunatique CD out. Lunatic, by the way, is how you say that in English. Lunatic, if you're speaking Serbian. So that's where we are. That's the context of Prince Waly, of Prince Waly. And the album's called Moussa, which is his actual first name. I couldn't find his actual last name, or I don't know. So maybe it is Waly. Maybe his name is Moussa Waly. I don't know. I don't know Senegalese naming traditions. So let me give you the stamp. Okay, I'm going to give you actually 2 stamps, 2 example songs to understand why this album is so good. One is going to be the third person, a sort of tough gangster song in the Mobb Deep and Lunatique mode, and the other is going to be more of a personal first-person song. The first one, I keep hitting this plant. This is my wife's plant, and I keep hitting it, so you're just going to have to hear that sound too. Stomping and plant hitting. The song up there, it's called Balotelli, featuring Freeze Corleone. I cannot stop playing this song. I cannot. This song is so good. If you're one of these people who thinks that rap has not evolved, or that rap has not gotten better than Mobb Deep, this is the song for you. 2 grimy, wonderful rappers over a wonderful, grimy beat, sparse, stop and start flow. This song is just so killer. It's just great. Starting off with these interesting rhymes. He talks about ce que mes scélérats font dans le Mercedes qui accélère à fond. This interesting interior rhyme with scélérat, which means like scumbags essentially, or like scoundrels. Accélère, which means to accelerate. So scélérer à fond is scoundrels do, and then accélère à fond means to accelerate as fast as possible. Scélérer à fond, accélère à fond. There's so many great options for homonyms and rhyming in French hip-hop. Because the French don't pronounce any of the letters in their words. They just have one letter, and then they just go... They just leave the rest of it there. In a similar way, he talks about fédération with dération, this beautiful, like, very rich multisyllabic rhyme of federation and rations. And then he makes a direct reference to listening to Mauvaise Oeil before going to prayers. So this is an interesting thing about this era of French hip-hop. So he's talking about going to prayers. He's from Senegal, like many people from Senegal, although not all. He is a Muslim, so he goes to prayers 5 times a day. And this idea of like listening to Mauvaise Oeil, listening to, that's the album by Lunatique, the one that I would be holding up if it wasn't in my office. By listening to Lunatique before going to prayers, it sort of shows the sort of split mind. Like like he has like this sort of very materialistic, crime-driven, dark, gritty street drama, and then his more pious self going to pray, to Mecca. And it's funny because one of my favorite quotes from this time is from a different rapper, La Fouine, another sort of huge figure in the early 21st century in French hip hop, where he talks about his life. He talks about his life and he says, you know, on a Friday night we go out and we F all the bees and we do drugs and get drunk and all that, and then I see the same homeboys praying at the mosque, you know, and that he says that's the youth of today. That's what La Fouine says, and so this is really in that sort of mode of showing this kind of division. Now, I'm a French professor, okay? I already told you that I don't get to teach much French. I don't get to teach much French above 111. Beyond bonjour, je m'appelle. So allow me to show you the glory of French hip-hop. Now, part of the glory of French hip-hop is the fact that it is very often in very different linguistic registers. If you rap with a very fancy proper English in English, it doesn't come across well. In general, the register that you can register, meaning like the style of speech, you have to keep it at a certain street level in order to be taken seriously. Par contre, on the other hand, in French hip-hop, you know, like the French education system is better than the American education system for the average, okay? The American education system is much better for the excellent, right? Like we have much more freedom to become truly spectacular, but the base level, just like your standard high school graduate from France, knows probably more than your standard college graduate in America. That might be oversaying it, but not by much, okay? So part of the thing is, in French high schools, they study poetry. They study philosophy. So even if you are just a rapper from the streets, you've probably graduated high school. You've probably had to really spend a lot of time understanding poetry and proper usage and proper speech. So when we get to a line like this, rappeurs font que les sautes avant qu'on les saute, faut qu'on les sauve de l'industrie, faut qu'on les sorte. As a French professor, this just is an absolute dream, okay? So, I mean, I gave you the translation down there. Rappers play dumb before we jump them, gotta save them from the industry, gotta get them out. That doesn't do any justice to it, okay? So like, rappeurs font les sautes. So saute means like stupid, like a very silly, stupid person. Faut qu'on les saute. So sauter means to jump. But what's awesome here is that les, in this case, is a article meaning the stupids. Okay, the dummies, let's say that. And then here, it is a direct object, meaning them, which in French goes before the verb, not after. So in French, instead of saying, I jump them, you say, I them jump. So it's making an internal rhyme with les sautes and les sautes. Two very different words, but that obviously have a very similar sound. It's using alliteration with the S. And on top of all of that, it's using this expression, quand les saute, which is implying the usage of necessity, and que, which creates a subjunctive. So this is actually a subjunctive usage in French hip-hop. It's fascinating. Okay, the subjunctive is one of the most complicated things in the French language. So the fact that we have rappers who are talking about jumping bad MCs and using the subjunctive. And it goes even further in the next line with more subjunctive. Faut qu'on les sauve de l'industrie, il faut qu'on les sorte. Multiple usages of the subjunctive, interior rhymes, hominid, like homophones, you know, words that sound the same, subjunctive usage, hardcore, awesome. Is that boring to you? I don't care. I don't care. Je m'en fous. I love it. This, if it were up to me, I would do that. God damn, I love doing that. I love doing this kind of breakdown. I'll do a little bit more of that breakdown later. And then we, get to this funny chorus here, which is sort of at the heart of this song. Tu nous as regardé, on danse pas pour des pennies. So we don't dance for pennies. On découpe comme les bouchers, comme les Benny. He's making a direct reference to Benny the Butcher from Griselda, an hour away from me. Okay? Probably sitting there waiting for the Buffalo Bills football game to start. Okay? American football. So it's an interesting, reference to a modern American rapper, underground rapper as well. I think there's sort of a meaning there. Sorry, my lighting is all kind of blown out here. Maybe if I move into the darkness a little bit more, this will work. It's snowing finally here. So I feel like the light is just too bright. Génération Mario Balotelli. So he's making a reference to Mario Balotelli, which if you're an American, you have no idea who he's talking about. Okay? Mario Balotelli. You're probably thinking, oh, is he that famous Italian chef? Mario Balotelli. I think the best way to... Mario Balotelli might be Allen Iverson. Maybe... No, who's that basketball player who got in a lot of trouble for getting into fights? He never lived up to his potential. You can tell me in the comments. Mario Balotelli was an Italian soccer player of African descent. His life story is fascinating. He was adopted and spent time with his birth family and he was a huge superstar. But he was always getting in trouble. He was always out before the game and getting drunk and smoking cigarettes and how can you be a smoker and play soccer? I mean, that game is nothing but running around in circles. And he had a huge mohawk and he was a real street soccer player, a real street star. But he's also a very specific time here. Génération Mario Balotelli. The young kids today, they're not in that generation. Balotelli is playing, I think, in Switzerland, somewhere like that. He's not a big star anymore like he used to be. He also played half season with Marseille. There we go. But that's a very specific time period. Much like Allen Iverson. If you say, I am from the Allen Iverson generation, you're not 20 years old. Right? It means that you're 30 years old or 40 years old like this guy is. So it's an interesting call to a very complex and racially coded figure in European culture. I mean, Mario Balotelli, many European soccer stars who are not white end up suffering massive, subtle racism in the press and from the fans all the time. There's just no doubt. If Mario Balotelli looked like you would think he looks like with a name like Mario Balotelli. You're probably picturing Mario from Super Mario Brothers. It's okay. That was his nickname, Super Mario. You're not picturing a black guy with a mohawk, but that's very much part of this Génération Mario Balotelli. Just saying the name is so evocative and even political. Then there's a guest verse from Freeze Corleone, who's just great. He's awesome. People have been telling. I've heard his name a couple times. His name is so stupid. Just Freeze Corleone. That's just such a stupid name. I'm sorry. Excuse-moi, Freeze. But wow, he's got a great flow. He really does. He makes reference to Verstappen, a Formula One race car driver. Again, I like it when European hip hop makes reference to European culture. Right? Not just always with American culture. Because really, what the hell does a French person know about Kevin Durant? Nothing. I mean, you know who he is, but you don't. The same way that an American knows who Messi is. The same way Ye knows who Messi is, that's the way a French rapper knows who Kevin Durant is. These are very culturally specific things. So mentioning Max Verstappen, and I think on another song they mentioned Lewis Hamilton as well, a different Formula One racer. But here, what's great about Freeze Corleone, he does this whole series of lines where he ends everything with je, which means I have. But then he has the rhyme right before. So he does that interesting thing of having the same word at the end of each line, but then the syllables beforehand are the ones that rhyme. Découpé comme si des troubles j'ai, chaque investissement à la fin, au minimum, le double j'ai. Je pense que multiplier les sous que j'ai, tu ne veux pas goûter les soupes que j'ai, savent pas les kung fu que j'ai. kung fu that he has. He's rhyming soup, kung fu, money. It's pretty impressive. He also makes a reference to comparing someone to being an airsoft. And I think this is a reference to an event where Mario Balotelli got in trouble for shooting off BB guns like in a town square. Man, Balotelli was awesome. Now, the second step. So there we are. We're in kind of like a, get these bad rappers out. I'm a tough guy. Here I go. I used to be a dealer. And then we get to the song Broke. Very few rap songs talk about being broke. I'll include a link up there, not just to the song, but to him performing this on Colors. And if you can watch this without loving it, go ahead. That just means that you just don't like good rappers. It means that you're so blinded by your English language hegemonic ignorance that you can't hear good rapping if it's not in English. I challenge you. Great kind of bird sounds and snapping, and then it's a whole song about being broke. The banker told me that I was minus $3,000 in my bank account. I wanted a Ferrari. And he even goes on to say that but he can't complain about anything because migrants are trying to survive in tents. And he has this great chorus right here. Je suis broke. Using the English word broke. Je suis broke, meaning I am broke. And it's about this difficulty. And 99 rappers out of 100 are completely broke, okay? I would say probably 96 rappers are in debt because of trying to get their rap career going. But the conventions of hip-hop state that you must talk about how rich you are the entire time that you're totally broke, which therefore makes most first albums by most rap artists complete lies. They're praying to get a label to rent a Ferrari from whatever, East Cahuenga exotic car rentals so that they can look rich. And they're praying to rent a bracelet. And they're trying to do all these things. So this just bold statement of reality. Just I'm broke. And if there were more songs like this, I think rap would be in a better place. Because he was broke. It makes sense, he had some success. But he was living beyond his means, and this is what he's discussing. J'ai réduit mon espérance de vie, monsieur l'agent. J'ai bousillé ma santé pour de l'argent. Essentially saying he's given up his health for his money. And I say it all the time on this channel. I don't know why I get so preachy, but hey, the only luxury is health. That's it. If you told me I could either have $10 billion or the certainty that I will live until 100 years old, I will take the certainty I live to 100 years old. Okay? Just great. Great rhyming, great simple chorus. Okay. I'm now going to go through the rest of the album a little bit quicker. Okay. I'm going to teach you a new French expression. This is the coffee in my mug. Oh, please smash the like bucket and subscribe. I'm at 50,000 subscribers. It's a lot of subscriptions. This is my coffee cup. You can buy this too. The gym where I work out in the morning makes coffee, and this coffee is disgusting. There's an expression in French called jus de chaussette, which means sock juice. That's how serious the French are. Okay, so imagine this sock that I wore this morning, and I was sweating, and I was at the gym watching Brooklyn Nine-Nine on the elliptical, getting all sweaty, and then into the cup. That's what bad coffee tastes like. You're welcome. Jus de chaussette. Man, it's so bad that I'm barely even going to drink it. Free coffee is free coffee. So let's go through the rest of the album a lot quicker. It opens up with a track called Bleu, featuring Feu Chatterton, the indie darlings of France. So right off the bat, he announces hey, this is going to be an ambitious album. I'm going to have an unexpected featuring on this album, or as they call it in French, un featuring, where you don't expect an indie rock band to be here, but it's a great atmospheric announcement of the epicness of this album. The weird thing is, one of the guys, I think, from the band, Feu Chatterton, starts speaking, and it weirdly reminds me of a very controversial French figure, a guy named Dieudonné, anti-Semite, a very controversial, interesting character. But there's a song he has with Booba where he talks about the Black Code and he speaks over it, and this reminds me a lot of that. Now I don't think that the guy from Feu Chatterton and this guy Dieudonné have anything in common, but it's just the way he's delivering these lines makes me think that. Anyways, repeating of the word vérité, inheritance, simple punctuating rhymes, like there's a sort of announcement, right, of this album coming, and then we hear Prince start rapping, and as he starts rapping, all of a sudden these really funky drums come in, which is great, like an actual drummer playing an actual drum beat, a great, just powerful verse, asking over and over again if God exists. J'ai un frère en chaise roulante et un autre au paradis des enfants. You know, so I have a brother in a wheelchair and another in the heaven for children. Elle se demande si Dieu existe. So I assume this is referring to his mother, asking if God exists. I don't know. We then get to the next song, Waly Gator. Now this is like a way that he refers to himself. And I don't get this. I don't know if this is like, I think it's just a joke on alligator, alligator, Waly Gator. But there's also a theme park in France called Waly Gator. So is this a reference to the theme park? I don't know. But a great beat that builds up with layers, very sharp, hard rhymes here, multiplying voices. This interesting chorus where he talks about look out for the ascension, which I guess means like be careful, like ascending into heaven. I don't quite know. And then we have an ending line where it says, orphelins sont les hommes. Orphans are men. I mean, very poetic, right? Talking about that we're all orphans to a certain extent. Remember I was talking to you about how even like the most basic street French rapper, if they've been to a French school and graduated high school, has a very high level of education. And this guy isn't that way, by the way. He's very clearly like, you know, he doesn't come across as a guy who's trying to come across as the most street rapper. But it is important. The difference in education quality really does appear throughout all of French hip-hop. It's fascinating. But I'm going to give you another lesson. And this is a lesson on how French rap is interesting in how it's able to use different slangs. So there is a slang in France, developed in the suburbs of Paris in the 80s, called verlan, which means backwards. But it's the word backwards, but it's not even backwards. It's a backwards usage of syllables. So either taking a word and flipping it around or inverting the syllables, okay? When I lived in Marseille, I showed up and I thought I'd be cool using verlan, but you can't use it there. It's only for Parisians. And you never want to be confused as a Parisian when you live in Marseille. But it's a very interesting slang because it offers rappers more things to rhyme with. So I'll show you this line here, okay? Perquisition, which means, you know, search warrant, main dans le sac, hand in the bag, aucun bluff, j'atterris chez les keufs. So keuf is one of the most standard usages of verlan. As it is in America, there's a lot of slang for the police because a lot of slang was created to get around the police. Okay, that's why we have the 5-0, because we need ways of saying police that the police themselves don't understand. J'ai perdu des refs à cause de la puff. Fuck. Depuis, je fais plus la teuf. Interesting integration of English as well, and actually rhymes with this. I mean, it has a similar sonority, a similar vowel sound. Puff, fuck, puff. Okay, so here is ref, which is the word frère backwards, more or less. You might notice, oh, this isn't exactly backwards. Verlan is not about precision. It's about usage. Okay, so there's two different ways of looking at language. There's usage and there's rules. And usage is how people speak. Rules are how people up in an ivory tower determine how languages should be formed. Verlan is a great example of creating, being totally driven by usage. So flic means cops, but that became keuf. If it's actually backwards, it should be, you know, sklif. It should have been sklif, but it wasn't. They just said sklief. I don't know. They just said kuf. Kuf. Klif. Kuf. Kuf. It's all about usage. So puff is a weird term that means powder, and then fet backwards becomes tuff. Fet meaning party. So just with this new version of slang, we have kuf, tuff, ruf. Okay, and he's saying, I lost my brothers because of the powder, so I don't party anymore. He's talking about cocaine and losing his friends, you know? So it's all here, and it's able to create this very interesting rhyming sound. Aucun bluff, j'atterris chez les keufs, j'ai perdu des refs à cause de le puff, depuis je fais plus le tuff. Keuf, tuff, ruf, puff. Avertisseur, part 2, is another great homage to Lunatique. There's on that album that I didn't listen to back in 2000, the album that I bought at the Fnac on Rue Belzance. There's a song called Avertisseur. So it's basically like if he came out with a song called Shook Ones Part 3, you know? What's funny is it actually quotes in the beginning a different hardcore Parisian rap band from the turn of the century, Les X, or X-Men as they're also known. This song, which I've always loved. I also own that album. I would show that to you here. But they keep referring to a score and to a sport, but they pronounce it in the French way. Score, sport. Very funny, very cool, fast flow. If you listen carefully, you will hear Nelson from The Simpsons say, ha ha. He starts off kind of talking about, like, in this third person about his history as a dealer. This is where he mentions Lewis Hamilton. He mentions Amazons. Like, he mentions Muammar Gaddafi's armed female Amazons. I didn't know about those. Turns out Muammar Gaddafi, the dictator, had a whole team of women who were armed to the teeth. He rhymes the word billet, which means bill, with NBA. Billet, NBA. So NBA in French would be NBA, but NBA is what they call it because that's the initials that make sense because it's an American word. So again, it's this another thing that French rap can do because it has so much exposure to American culture and to American words. It can throw those in. I mean, American rap, we get that a little bit. You know, sometimes there will be a word in Spanish that's thrown around. I'm done. That's it. That's the linguistic variety that we ever get in American rap. Sometimes there'll be maybe Jamaican patois thrown in there, you know. But because French hip-hop has the influence from native languages, you know, languages from Africa and America and France and French slang, it has so much interesting variety. He also rhymes Red Bull and bus stop. Red Bull, and Red Bus. It's funny. That's all. Next song is called Rottweiler, featuring Ali from Lunatique. So, you know, this would be like if your favorite thing in the whole world was Mobb Deep and you got Havoc to appear on your album. Okay, it really is like Havoc because Ali is the less famous, and Prodigy, R.I.P., is the more famous of Mobb Deep. So it's amazing how good Ali's rhyme is here. I mean, he even quotes the most famous song, Le crime paye, so le crime paye, only crime pays. Sort of like that was the watershed moment for French hip hop, just deciding to be all about crime. Because I mean, truly, like before that, like the hardcore rappers were like NTM, whose name means fuck your mother, but who, like when they would talk about guns, they would say put down your guns. So really, it was with Lunatique where we started to see like the praising crime. The real fakeness of gangster rap started to make its appearance, but he quotes himself directly. What did you think, that we were going to let ourselves get drowned? Mais qu'est-ce que tu croyais, on allait rester là à se laisser noyer, laisse les médisants médire, laisse les aboyer. So, you know, just like keep on using this term laisser, which means to leave alone, and like rhyming aboyer, which means to bark, noyer, which means to drown, and croyer, which means to think or to believe. You know, just beautiful sonorities there. On m'a dit Ali Bomaye. You should know Ali Bomaye. That's from the Rumble in the Jungle when Muhammad Ali was able to get the citizens of then Zaire to chant Ali kill them, Ali kill him, Ali kill him, referring to George Foreman. great, interesting moment in the history of African American sport and world sport for that matter. And I responded, I will not kill anybody. So it's interesting how he's using the parlance from Kenya, aller bomayer, and then rhymes that with aboyer, croyer, and noyer. À quoi nous sert se venger quand pour nous tous la mort sonne? So here he's going the other way. He's being very honest. He's saying, what's the purpose of getting revenge when death comes for all of us? So it seems as though, maybe in a similar way to Clips, right? How Clips was a duo with, with Pusha T and his brother, and like Pusha T stayed gangster and then his brother got super religious. This feels like it's someone who's moved beyond gangster rap. He makes reference to Large Professor. He says in French, a large spirit like the professor from QB, which is cool. And then he uses the word apprivoiser, which is a word I learned from Le Petit Prince. And then we just had this amazing verse from Waly. This video is 45 minutes long. Man, no one's watching this video. God damn it. It's too long for a French person to sit through someone speaking English if they don't speak English really well. And it's too long for an American who's like super interested in French culture, because I'm just still talking about it. So please, if you're still here, tell me in the comments. Just say on est encore là, okay? Or we're still here. Please, because I'm losing faith in myself. But just amazing rhymes here. He makes reference to the greatest soccer player in the history of the world, Zidane. And then really the best rapping from Waly anywhere is at the end. And I'm not even going to translate it for you because what he's saying isn't really important. It's just he's rapping over this a cappella verse, and it feels as though he's trying to show off for his idol this repetitions of the line. La provenance n'a pas d'importance, important de prendre sa part, ébloui par la contenance, un pont pense avec un lingot à place du cerveau. Always like a pont, oh, ons, beautiful. Just listen, truly, just listen to the end of this song without understanding it and just hearing the beautiful flow of the words. Then we get to Balotelli, which I've already discussed. Then we get to Mess, which means mass. A third-person dealer story. This is the first time he uses the line, which he repeats a couple times, where he talks about, how he grew up in the HLM, which means the projects. He says how our scars were hidden underneath shea butter, beurre de karité. If you're white like me, you don't know the importance of shea butter. If you are of African descent, shea butter is an essential element for personal care. So it's an interesting reference that I'm very foreign to. I am on the road to extinction because of the color of my skin, like alligators and polo players. I don't know why he says that. I don't know why. I mean, I know he's talking about like Lacoste with the alligator and polo, but are those on the path to extinction? I don't quite get this line. Sometimes he gets awfully poetic and I don't get it. I thank heaven that I have a father. I am among those who have been traumatized to have peace. Beautiful, beautiful lyricism. The song Movie starts with barking, very simple piano, very nice strong drum beat with some like backwards sounds, just like a nice story. It's a super badass, sparse and cool, a story about like a meeting on a dark alleyway in Ruelle Sombre, all about this transaction and like what's in the bag. This is very much a third person, just hardcore, awesome rap song. He makes reference to a song, On va les allumer comme Hallyday, in reference to Johnny Hallyday, his famous song, Allumer le feu. Johnny Hallyday is a French national institution of terrible music. Dude just straight up sucks. Just terrible. I just pissed off some of my French viewers. I'm sorry, but Johnny Hallyday is everything that is wrong with the baby boomers in France. So, anyways, he's dead now. So, there's that. But there's a lot of great French rock and roll. Johnny Hallyday made none of it. Jacques Dutronc. Now there's a musician. Renaud. There's a musician. Johnny Hallyday. Anyways. But it's cool to have a rapper make reference to Johnny Hallyday because it's sort of like making an Elvis reference. But anyways. Moussa Part 2 is just an interlude of him driving in a car and getting into an accident. And we go back to the cover with the image of him in the hitting the airbag. And this, again, the richness of this album is really spectacular because the next song is going to be about a car crash. But the car crash is sort of a metaphor for his life, is sort of a metaphor for life itself. And in the background, during this car crash, you hear a singer named Enchantée Julia, who is on the next song. She's an R&B singer, and I was listening to the song with my daughter. We were in the car, I was listening to it with her, and she's like, oh, I know Enchantée Julia. She's great. She has that song Vénus. My daughter is listening to French R&B without telling me. How cool is that? And, by the way, are you interested in good French R&B? Enchantée Julia, I listened to her album. It's awesome. It's great. It's like a great album. Damn it. There's just not enough time in the week to listen to all the great music. Encore, si vous êtes français, partagez cette vidéo. Comme ça, je peux faire plus de vidéos sur la musique française. Just a very nice it sort of reminds me of Stan, the song by Eminem, just with this very nice chorus that's sung by a singer and an interesting verse that features a car crash. Also features Jazzy Baz, who's someone else suggested I review. Very cool internal rhyming. Next song is called Problème, featuring someone named Luigi, but it's spelled differently. Very funny. And Makala, who's a different singer that someone suggested. He's a Swiss guy who makes great sort of R&B style hip-hop. I'd like to review him as well. I didn't like the song at first, but then it has such a great groove that I ended up liking it. But this is, with that interlude a couple songs ago, this is like the next phase of the album. So it went from tough guy, now we're on lover guy, lover man mode. We're singing a lot about love and about relationships and about this car crash. We hit the next song, BBF, which is another kind of love song, all about like a breakup. I used to say we, I now say I. I still have your underwear in my apartment. Kind of a weird thing to say. I still have your underwear in my apartment. Okay. Ugh, juste des chaussettes. Next song is Stamp, which I already mentioned. Then Miroir, Mirror. So at the end with Broke, we have the last three songs of the album, which is the final phase, which is a much more personal, confessional mode. This is the person who has come face to face with death and then lived and is changed by the experience. He talks about the difficulty of being in front of a mirror. I will take any opportunity I can to mention the work of French moralist Blaise Pascal, who, much like Dieudonné, was a terrible anti-Semite. Beyond that, he had a lot of interesting... he wasn't an existentialist, because the term existentialism didn't exist at that point, back in the 17th century, but Blaise Pascal did discuss how impossible it is for us to be alone with our thoughts, especially alone in a room in front of a mirror. That we cannot possibly suffer through that. It is such suffering to be alone in a room with a mirror. And this is the place where he is. He doesn't know himself, and he's just stuck in this place where he's trying to figure out who he is and why he's here. He requotes himself, that whole verse about knowing precarity, knowing financial ruin and knowing the projects. But then at the end, he goes back to this idea. And I'll just translate here. It rhymes in French. Despite everything, I thank heavens that I have a father. Mama thought that I was going to die more than one time in my life. She would like to change the disc. She's already lost a son. My father already told me I love you with tears in his eyes. No need for an encyclopedia. If I have a doubt, I will speak to the elderly. So a weird sort of veneration of his father, this sort of generational appreciation of what his parents went through. I've never heard anything like that. In any rap song ever. Have I ever heard anyone say, I'm just going to go talk to older people? The album ends with the song Mercy. It opens up with his mother's voice. It's funny because Lil Sims, a month ago, came out with the song No Mercy, and she's also playing with the fact that merci in French means thank you, but also it refers to mercy as being spared from death by God. So it's fascinating here that he's using that a rapper in England and a rapper in France, totally separate, are creating this similarity. And he's obviously working through cancer and coming to terms and saying thank you for that. He explains his whole history with cancer without rhyming. And he says, Inshallah. And then he sort of goes on a kind of self-help talk. So there's my review of the album Prince Waly. It is, in my opinion, the best French rap album I heard this year. Other albums that were suggested to me, Big Flo and Ollie, a huge group. I liked their album when I listened to it. It's a little too pop. I didn't get that into it. I probably should listen to it though because they're such an important force. In a similar way, someone suggested DC's album. And it's weird to me because I remember when DC's La Peste came out in 2000, I was living in Marseille, and like, he's still around 20 years later. It's not really a rap album, but it's really solid. It's really good. It's like, it's sort of closer to Stromae than it is, to Wally Gator, but it's really good. Another person suggested ZZ Kaka mixtape. That's ZZCCMXTP. A very avant-garde 1 hour and 45-minute album, which is some of the best rap production I've heard in the year. It's really, really spectacular. Like, very, very varied. I couldn't figure out what I really wanted to say about it. If I had more time in my life, I would do a review of that. I would also do a review of the album by Dinos, D-I-N-O-S, Hiver à Paris, Winter in Paris. I once spent a winter in Paris. Very strong song, maybe a little too much that auto-tune singing, but quite good. BB Jacques, someone else suggested. Another album which I kind of had to flip a coin. If I was going to do BB Jacques, Dinos, or this. I really enjoyed that BB Jacques. Someone suggested Roger, who's very good, but it's Canadian. I already talk enough. Well, I don't talk enough about Canadian rap, but I already talk a fair amount about Canadian rap. Grems. Who the hell is this guy? How have I never heard of this guy? He's an amazing rapper, an amazing producer. He's also a graffiti artist. He also has a full-on design business. Who is this guy? How have I never heard of him? He's like one of the most interesting artists, with a capital A. He might not be the most interesting rapper, but as far as an artist goes, I don't even know what to do with all these. Hey, if you're a French viewer, would you please tell me more? Si vous êtes français, pouvez-vous m'avertir? Je sais pas. Vous pouvez laisser des messages, des commentaires sur les autres vidéos en disant tiens, ce gars, un album intéressant est sorti en France. Just tell me, Tell me about it. The Makala, that Swiss guy who's already on this album, another very interesting album, very singy, quite good. Heskis, an EP, self-produced, super talented. There's a whole series of white French rappers. There's one thing I regret about the golden age of French hip-hop, is that the golden age of French hip-hop was very mixed, where you had black, Arab, and white rappers all rapping together. It's now kind of segregated, which is kind of sad. It's not kind of sad, it's very sad. I'm not going to get into the sociological reasons why that happened, nor do I feel fully competent of explaining it, but that used to be how it is. But still, there's at least a very strong heritage of white rappers in France being taken seriously, taking themselves seriously, adding to the culture, not being culture vultures, but being a part of the culture. I think Orelsan is the most famous example. I reviewed his album as well. I think he's provided a model for a kind of white rapper to be culturally relevant and independent and meaningful. And Heskis, they wouldn't pronounce the H, is sort of I think, in that tradition. I also want to thank someone on Instagram, Faithful Till I'm Gone, who sent me a link to some Instagram pages that are good for learning about French hip hop. So there we go, everybody. I'm going to try and keep this under an hour. And if there's any good Marseille rap, would someone please tell me? There's the camera.